Welcome back to the ServingKult podcast. This is the place where you can explore culture, chaos, and our keyword this month, hyperpop. Throughout this episode, we will be speaking about hyperpop and only this genre, looking at how people discovered this area of music. Is hyperpop dead? And what sort of production makes this genre? So keep listening to learn more about hyperpop and all its connotations with me, Anya, and the lovely contributors of this episode.
I'm Josh Anop. I run an event called Dreamland. I produce, I DJ, and also run BPM Society for this year.
God, what don't you do? So when you say Anop, is that your DJ handle? Is that what you kind of go underneath for like releases and stuff?
Yeah, so it's been for both. I got it from, I used to play like Pokemon games when I was really young, and the first ever Pokemon game I completed, my name was Anop, and I've just like rolled with that ever since.
Oh, sick. I kind of love that. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Do you both want to tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my name's Maeve, and
My name's Jasper.
yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
And we're Lucky Iris, and we are a pop band in Leeds who love all things hyperpop, love all things pop, and yeah, we're really happy to be here.
So for people who've never heard of you, Lucky Iris folk before, what kind of stuff should we expect from your kind of live performances and music, etc.?
I like to say we're like cute, crunchy pop. That's
I like
that's
that.
my 3 words. What would you say?
Yeah, I agree. We've released lots of different kind of genres of music. Especially we do lots of remixes, which gives us loads of freedom to kind of experiment with all kinds of new sounds and kind of redo some of the tracks we've done ourselves in a different format. And yeah, so you can expect lots of
Anything.
Yeah.
Expect anything.
No, I think like the first hyperpop track we released was of, I think, probably my favourite song that we'd released to date. And we'd done like 20 versions of the track. Like I was desperate to release it. Our team weren't quite as keen on the track as I was, but like I didn't really mind. And so after releasing the track, I was like, let's do another one. Like I see the songs as like a diary. Specifically that song, it felt like, because of how many versions we'd gone through of it, it felt like a diary of how we'd developed as artists. And at that time in particular, like when we're releasing music, we find it often quite difficult to listen to other new music that's coming out because it can get quite overwhelming. But hyperpop was something that we could listen to. Like the freedom and expression of it, we were like, that's what we could enjoy. So it felt right to then release a hyperpop version of that track. And that kind of started our journey in that sphere of that kind of area of our music. So that was really fun.
Do you want to tell me a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Max, and I used to run events, maybe still might do a couple more events potentially.
To be confirmed?
Yeah, but essentially, I used to sort of put on a kind of hyperpop adjacent night with a lot of people from PC Music and Only Fire, people like that. And I also kind of wrote a dissertation as well on PC Music and Sophie. And I spoke a little bit about PC Music on Radio 6 last year when it all kind of came to a head as well.
Which is so crazy.
So I like to think that I'm like the resident sort of like PC Music professor now, I guess.
A professor in PC Music.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can edit that in now. Professor of PC Music, Max.
Hello.
Do you want to tell us a bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, my name's Karman. I'm a singer, songwriter, and a producer. In terms of what I do, there's not really, especially on this next project that I've got coming out soon, there's not really a genre that I'm not touching. I like to use the term jack of all trades, master of none. Because that's
fair enough.
Because it's like, I think a lot of people have a lot of shame about like, there's a lot of talk of like, oh, just hone in on one thing and be really good at that one thing. But like, where's the fun in that? Where's the fun in that? Do what you want. So that's just, I would consider myself that. That's what I do, is just, I hear things and I go, I want to make that. And then I go and make it. And usually the the thing that is the through line throughout all of it is my voice and my personal take on things.
And I guess production as well.
And yeah, well, obviously, yeah, my production. But like, it can change. It does change a lot. Like, I feel like I've got to like caveat a lot, not caveat, like like show people that like it's not gonna just be one thing, because I don't want people to think like, oh, it's this one.
Because obviously pigeonholing yourself.
I'm not
into
pigeonholing.
a genre.
That is the way to put it. I've got like this. I think it's hard to explain because the album's not out yet. But when the album's out, people get what I'm getting at.
I mean, I guess the real question is, how did you discover Hyperpop?
Well, it was, I think like ages ago I first heard Sophie on like a mix for Logo magazine. It was Bip before Bip had come out. It was on the Crimes mix, if you remember those guys, a kind of like witch housey rave duo. But I didn't know what it was because it wasn't released, and it was just kind of like living in my brain for about 2 years until my dad, weirdly enough, sent me an article about PC music, and he was like, "Oh, you'll like this," which was very astute of him. He fully like just clocked that I'd be really into it, even though it's absolutely not the sort of thing that he'd be into at all. And I just kind of like went down that wormhole and got a little bit obsessed and started to go to stuff in London a lot, which I think was really important. I think people think about sort of like hyperpop as being this online thing and a sort of online scene, but for me actually it was kind of more about going to the sort of IRL spaces and experiencing it there that I think was really important. So that's kind of what got me into it. I met a few friends down in London that I would go and stay with and just kind of like be really nerdy with.
And would you all go to these events together? And
yeah,
I'm sure you've seen some of the greats. I'm sure you look
we went. We saw
early on.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, I think like the first thing that I went to was Sophie at Field Day.
See, that's crazy. You've seen Sophie.
Yeah. I think I saw Sophie like 16 times.
Mad.
But so we go to like a lot of that stuff together. We went to like some of the really early PC music shows like XOYO, and they did like the Pop Heaven and Pop Cosmos, where they had like the sort of full PC music lineup playing. And yeah, we went to like a lot of that sort of stuff down in London, and that was really fun. And at the time I was kind of writing my dissertation for like the 3 years that I was at uni, because I knew what it was going to be. So I was like, it's research. I'm going to London to do research. But really I was just going to the club. But yeah.
Technically it's research though, if you wrote a dissertation on
exactly,
Hyperpop.
I
can't dispute that. I guess the really big question that people are dying to hear is, how did you discover Hyperpop?
Oh, to pinpoint exactly when it like entered my consciousness is pretty difficult, but I'd say it would be around about the time that I'd started uni. So that's late 2020. And I discovered it mainly through like music that was adjacent to it, like not exactly the core thing itself. Like Machine Girl, which I discovered through liking The Prodigy, which is like from the 90s. And I think that's like, you know, telling of like how many different routes this whole movement comes from. But through Machine Girl, that kind of led me to like Dorian Electra, and then Dorian Electra, you know, opened up that whole thing to me. But yeah, I think it was through doing a lot of music listening. Like I'm quite intentional with discovering new music and discovering new stuff. It's kind of like one of my hobbies is to just sit on Spotify and just like go down rabbit holes. So it was kind of a product of doing that, was kind of how I became aware of hyperpop.
Good question. I think
I think everybody has to ask themselves at some point and be like,
honestly, I think Charlie XCX just came a recommendation when I was like 14.
Mm-hmm.
And then just ever since then, just my whole music taste started with like Pop 2. That was like the album for me.
The definitive kind of like hyperpop start album for real.
Absolutely.
And how did you move from there? So you started with Charlie XCX, and did you kind of gonna go into more mainstream, or did you kind of move to more niche artists? Where did you kind of go from Charlie XCX? Kind of a pivotal person to start with, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I kind of like was just really into pop music. And then I started producing like the same time, like 14, 15. And I never really thought about the complexity of pop music, but as soon as you start producing it, it's like, oh, it's incredibly hard to produce compared to like other genres I found. And that just kind of made me appreciate it a whole lot more. And it kind of went from appreciating like broad mainstream pop. So like, yeah, I'm a really big fan of Sabrina Carpenter at the moment.
To be fair, who isn't at this point?
Who isn't? But yeah, just pop in general I got really into, and then that sort of stemmed into more dance music.
So when it comes to you and your like relationship, I guess, with Hyperpop, how did you kind of discover it? Where did the inspiration come from?
For me, I always find myself like 10 years behind all new music. So I properly discovered Hyperpop in about 2020, and I don't think I've listened to anything else since. But it's a good way to find new music, and I feel like it's such a like expressive form of music, and there's not really any boundaries. Whilst I think it kind of strips music back to like lots of the time it's very simple chords and very simple hooks, which are then kind of used in as many ways as you can think of. And I think it's a great way to put, like, even if it's just one word sometimes, throughout your track in as many forms as possible. Which I think it was a great way to express some of the music we were writing at the time, and then it's kind of continued since.
Yeah, I think we like looked at a lot of our favorite artists at the time that we were taking inspiration from, and like the common thread that they all seemed to have was that they all really enjoyed Hyperpop and had worked with, you know, people like Sophie. We were listening to like a lot of Kim Petras, like a lot of Charlie XCX, and when you look at all of their favorite music, like it all goes back to like 2012 SoundCloud tracks. So I think we were like, we want what they're getting. And that made us like pay a lot more attention to what's happening. Because I think it took a long time for us to call ourselves pop.
I guess it's a hard thing to admit, because I feel like it's almost like a dirty word calling yourself a pop musician, but
to be
without
like new
pop, there wouldn't be a music industry, you know?
Exactly. And to be new pop sounds quite pretentious. Like, we're pop. Like, it took a while because, like, saying you're new, I mean, I don't think people really use pop as, like, popular music necessarily in the sense now, like, pop has its own sound.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about pop through the eras, it's just what was popular. And at the moment, and for the last 10, 20 years, that's been, like, has been electronic music, like in the charts, I guess. But yeah, for us to say that we were pop artists, it's definitely taken a while. You'll still see alt at the front of a lot of our press releases, but it's more of like a safety barrier because people still, I guess, don't know how to take you self-identifying as pop music.
Since you are resident Hyperpop, you know, professor.
I feel like I picked myself up too much.
Yeah, but I'm really interested to know.
Really intellectual.
I'm interested to know, how would you define Hyperpop personally?
Okay, so I think it's an interesting question because like I do feel like there's a little bit of a split because you've got the early kind of like PC music-y stuff, and then you've got the sort of like post 100 gex kind of more American stuff. And I do think there is a little bit of a split. But yeah, I think the first sort of earlier Hyperpop, I would say, is the kind of like PC music-y stuff. And at the time, people were calling it all sorts of stuff. I don't think Hyperpop was really like a phrase people used until a little bit later. People used to call it bubblegum bass, which was kind of stupid because actually the early stuff doesn't really have very much bass in it at all. And then there was also post-ringtone music, people were calling it.
Oh my God.
There's this whole like Dazed article where it's like, what is post-ringtone music? But I don't think any of those phrases really stuck. And then someone coined, I think it was like Spotify made the Hyperpop playlist, didn't they? Which I think actually makes a lot of sense, because sonically what I think it's about is kind of turning certain things up to like 100. So just kind of like really just making, just dialing it up a lot more with the sort of sonics and the aesthetics as well, I guess. Like especially with the vocals, like I think, you know, when you listen to all that early PC music stuff, it's about the sort of vocal distortion, that kind of baby girl high pitched thing. But also I think that something people often forget about is, I think that it's also about taking stuff out. So like the early kind of hyperpop stuff, the PC music stuff, I feel like a lot of it was like, how do we make these big pop bangers that really slap, but actually by taking things away? Because if you listen to something like Bip, for example, like there's not a lot of bass in it, and there's not a lot of kind of, you know, like the 4x4 that you kind of do often get with a lot of sort of pop dance music. That wasn't there in a lot of the earlier stuff. So I think that the earlier hyperpop is kind of actually characterized maybe more around that, around sort of turning the volume up to, or the kind of like knob up to 100 with certain things, but then also just kind of getting rid of aspects
and
as well.
Parts, right?
Yeah, but then I think that later it just became a little bit more about just being kind of fully maximalist. When you listen to sort of like 100 Gex, like their last album, for instance, it's just kind of like everything in the kitchen sink and just kind of really just amping everything up, which I think is maybe a little bit less interesting for me personally. Like I do like that stuff to an extent, but I think it's got almost a little bit boring now. So I kind of prefer the earlier stuff a little bit for that reason, I think.
To me, I don't know if this is coming from like the way that the philosophy I have on music as a whole, like in general. But because I've never really, I'm not dismissive enough to think that genre as a concept is completely dead and makes no sense at all, because clearly there's certain collections of sounds and palettes and atmospheres that can be described with adjectives and lumped under a term. So I'm not one of these people who thinks that like genre full stop is completely useless, because, you know, it helps people find things that they're looking for in music. But I think because I have a philosophy on music that is very much genre is a vehicle to an emotion. It's not something you pigeonhole yourself in. I would never put genre over myself as an artist. I would put genre to each song and to what feeling I'm trying to convey. Because sometimes I think people are like, I'm a pop artist, but I want to write an angry song. So I'm going to write an angry pop song. I'm like, why not write a metal song? You know, because that's anger. That's pure rage. And I think that people limit themselves because they're looking through the lens of genre a lot. When it comes to hyperpop, if I were to describe what I personally believe hyperpop to be, I'd be hearkening back to what Björk has said about pop music, just in general, which is that, you know, it's not, pop purely is like something that can resonate on a really mass scale in terms of like emotion or like what the artist is trying to convey. And if you look at Björk, many people would not say she is a pop musician, but she has always continually described herself as a pop artist. And to me, when you can stretch the boundaries of pop as far as possible, like with what I've been developing for the past 3 years since I last released, and what I've been wanting to do since even before then, like just taking genre wherever you want to, that is hyper pop to me. I think that it's not necessarily just the sound that the playlist would have people believe. I think it's literally when you don't see boundaries within pop, it is hyper pop, in my opinion.
It's funny, isn't it? Because what is hyperpop now compared to what was it when it started? I guess talking about hyperpop in 2024 is probably very different to what it was, again, talking about it like 10 years ago. But I think it's always been pushing boundaries. It's always been what's new and exciting. It's always been like deeply linked with the queer scene, with like electronic music, with kind of no snobbery around like what it means to make music. Like it's seeing yourself in a scene, it's all of these things, and it's just really exciting. I think we've always found it really exciting. Whether or not people believe that hyperpop, as it officially was named, has ended,
Yeah. I think we've heard the phrase a lot recently that hyperpop is dead.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
which
I've seen
as
this all
artists-
over.
Yeah, as artists doing hyperpop, we're a bit like, no, I think everyone's kind of getting their chance to be able to have a go.
Yeah.
I feel like lots of the sounds originally, they're all done in a really cool East London studio. And it produced incredible music. And I feel like it's now really like kind of bleeding into current pop music, other genres. And I think everyone's kind of getting a go. And I get that it kind of reduces the niche. We kind of make hyperpop inspired music, which we love putting hyperpop sounds into like a pop track, and it creates a cool blend of genres. So I get how people would kind of turn around and go, that's not a hyperpop track, or that is a hyperpop track. And I feel like in terms of genre defining, I like the direction it's going in, because I think it means everyone can kind of get on board a bit more, and you'll kind of hear it in like the biggest pop artist track right now. Like Charlie XCX releasing this. It's not hyperpop, but it's you can hear like the inspirations and kind of the next step.
Yeah, like people have taken like, that's why you say we're like crunchy pop. And like pop music is heavier now. It's like got these more unexpected sounds. But it's funny because people don't like things when they become mainstream.
With hyperpop, does that actually inspire you to do what you do now? So if it has, have you kind of incorporated that into your creative pursuits?
I think if we're talking about hyperpop, the way that it's commonly understood, I'd say yeah. And I think also even in my understanding of it, yes, also. Like it's, I think in terms of, you know what, actually, I think when I think about it properly now, the way that I was making music before I knew what hyperpop was, I was looking for a place where I fit, because I couldn't there wasn't any sort of
space in the sphere,
like a microcosm of artists, or like a, you know, there wasn't anything where I could put myself in, and it was quite like isolating.
Yeah, I guess there was nothing out there that you could relate to in terms of like a home.
Yeah, because a lot of the music where I would put myself was from the 90s and from the early 2000s. Like but obviously there wasn't really a new movement of people who were inspired by that, or at least I hadn't seen them yet, you know. And then when obviously I saw like PC music, that whole label and the way they were doing things, I was like, this is like, it's not necessarily stuff that sounds like my music precisely, but it's like the philosophy that they have on music is similar to mine. And I think that it was like I was already kind of on the train tracks, but then when I found that, it was like I had kind of started rolling with something, you know.
You felt like it was something that you kind of paralleled.
Yeah.
In something that you already did. Yeah.
I was already like kind of getting to that, and then that started, I like discovered that, and then I moved along with that. But it's also like I'm not like ever consciously being like, I am in hyperpop circles. I am a hyperpop musician. I should apply my music to hyperpop playlists and, you know, play with hyperpop artists. I've just never seen it that way. It's more just that like that general open-mindedness to experimentation within pop music and stretching the boundaries of what we consider pop music to be, or how more accurately, like how we frame that within just an individual artist, because like the idea that like an artist has to make one type of like palette of sounds, and you know, I never really subscribed to that. So but like in terms of the way that, or I already like the philosophy I have on hyperpop, I'd say like I very much, if to be inspired by hyperpop with that lens is like I'm inspired by every type of music ever, because it informs the way that I would create pop. Like I've been listening to like Gregorian chant music and like and I'm not even honestly it
kind of slaps.
Oh, it's so good. But like,
where do you listen to that? Just like at home, like making
I'll be going out and about with my headphones on. Do you know where the number one place where I listen to music is? On public transport.
So listening to Gregorian chant music.
Yeah.
On the bus.
God. You know, no, I'm not even joking, right? That like chanted psalms, right? With like organ. So cool. Makes you feel like so epic while you're going about. Love it.
And so regal.
Absolutely love it. It's so good. But like stuff like that, and like Baroque music is like a huge inspiration on Baroque music's been an inspiration for, oh my gosh, for ages. But like in the same way that like I can see the through line from Baroque music to melodic death metal, you know, I'm like doing that with my own stuff. I'm not like, I'm just letting whatever. I think a lot of people like limit what something could be because they're like, no, this is what it is before they've even let it become what it could be. They're like, oh, this is the vision. Like, okay, but if you're feeling like, say, you're in the middle of writing a song that's like got a breakbeat, and suddenly you're like, oh, what if I added like a chugging metal guitar? And then you shut off that thought and you go, no, why would I do that? That makes no sense because I'm making XYZ. Then you're like cutting off the potential of what you could create.
Did hyperpop inspire you to do what you do now?
Yeah, completely. I mean, it's kind of like entirely from hyperpop in a way, and even though I found that difficult to produce, it really influenced my DJing and the sort of sounds that I gravitate towards. And with the events, even though there are some incredible hyperpop events in Leeds, like Toothpick and Hardcore Besties, and even T40 has some influences here and there, I just really liked that sort of, I think, creating what hyperpop is to me and sort of contributing to that community was just a really important thing, as it's something that I've always really resonated with.
Not what I do now exactly in terms of like a career, no, but like I think that like what it inspired was me kind of meeting like-minded people. It definitely inspired me to do sort of the shows that I was doing when I was doing them. And I really enjoyed doing that, and I got a lot out of it. So yeah, in that way it did. As a career, I work for Citizens Advice, so I don't get very many people asking me about hyperpop. But yeah, it definitely kind of like inspired the way that I think as well. I think it was like the first time that I'd really connected with other queer people as well. So I think that on that kind of level, it was really important, and kind of, yeah, I think I needed that at that point in time, which was good.
With your kind of hyperpop-esque sounds, how do you kind of incorporate that into the production of your music, and how do you kind of, I guess, make the crunchy pop? How does it work?
Yeah, I think we like a blend between like really clean sounds, especially a clean vocal on top, possibly with a bit of auto-tune, but again, we don't put as much as most hyperpop artists.
It's not the stylistic choice.
Yeah. And then we probably overuse a bit crusher. Everything is put through this highly distorted kind of, most synths are, but if you mix it with like the clean sounds, usually like quite a clean big bass drum. That's what we kind of go for. And
I think we look at like, we go for, at the moment what we're making, I'd say is probably somewhere in between Hannah Diamond's like very, very clean hyperpop sound, which we adore, and like Charlie's heavier, more distorted version of that. But the kind of spoken sung style with like something a lot harder going on behind, like that's what we like, and it's fun to make, and it feels right for us.
And I guess as you experiment and try and find, you know, your sound, and I guess that will constantly forever change the more like, music you listen to, it's a nice place to start because anything's possible.
Yeah, and I think my voice and the music, I think, is what we work it all around, and it's...
Yeah, I think we're very song-led, which is very... each song will usually have a pretty song structure standard. And we love working around like the classic kind of pop song sound. And then we'll like interweave those hyperpop elements through it.
Which is why like someone like Kim Petras is somebody that we listen to a lot, because she really pop girls the whole thing. Like even with her most like silly, crazy songs, they're a song, like, and it's
it will
it's
be
really fun.
first chorus, bridge, chorus.
And we're not saying we'll always be that strict,
outro.
but like we still
we
write,
love doing that.
we still write the songs.
I think it's
like
it's
songs.
a really nice structure to get the meanings behind the songs, like, set, and it's a really good way of getting like the lyrical elements in that we're very kind of focused behind, which some hyperpop artists will take that one hook and put it throughout the song, which we definitely do in our remixes, which is why we love doing some remixes, because we'll get the one hook of the song and kind of remove song structure lots of the time.
Obviously, you mentioned you're a producer, which I think is very important to kind of champion, especially because, you know, you also produce for other people as well as yourself.
Yeah.
So in terms of production, what would you say makes hyperpop music?
This is another case of like, there's the internet concept of what hyperpop is, and then there's what I've explained, what I feel hyperpop is, and what I think a lot of the people who originated what we consider hyperpop would consider it to be, which is like, I think that if I was to think about my production, hyperpop in that sense is, it doesn't matter what you put in there. If you've got the essence of pop, if you're coming at it trying to create something that is catchy regardless of instrumentation and has that pop essence, then it's hyperpop, because you're like, as I said, just stretching the boundaries of what pop can be. I think if we were looking at the playlisting version of hyperpop, you know, I'd say metallic sounding drums and loud, over-compressed, nearly clipping auto-tune vocals, and, you know, but it's like, I think that, you know, Björk's new album, Forsora, I think it's pronounced, if you wanted to call that hyperpop, you could call that hyperpop, but nobody's out here saying Björk's a hyperpop artist. Everybody's saying she's just Björk. Like, that's that. And if we wanted to go back in time, we'd be like, okay, what's like super cheesy, super shiny, like this is the true essence of pop to its like T. You know, you could go back and look at Britney Spears, and then are we saying, oh, Britney Spears is hyperpop? Do you know what I mean? Like, when did hyperpop start? You know, it's like, I think that any time where you're just getting to like the truest essence of something and not allowing preconceived ideas of what pop should be to get in the way of what you're creating, then you're creating hyper pop. So like, production wise, I think it's literally just, it's really hard to explain when my album's not out yet, But like, I think after me saying all this, and when people hear the album, they're gonna understand what I'm saying, because it's like every song is a different genre, and every song goes like for a different feeling. Like for like, just for some spoilers, you know, I've got like a house music track on there, and then I've got the one that's just come out, which is like an acoustic Radiohead sounding one. Then, you know, there's gonna be a very operatic 80s like propaganda inspired, like Susie and the Banshees inspired song on there.
It must be nice as well, you know, as somebody who is producing, to go for something so difficult like hyperpop, because it's going to make a lot of things a lot easier once you've kind of produced something or tried to produce, you know, similarly to something that's quite difficult. Definitely.
I think it helps your sound design, and it's just a fun, challenging experience, especially the amount of rules that you can break, and the amount of like templates that you might have in other genres just like fall apart when it's like, hey, I want to go into a hard style drop or drum and bass, or like switch it up into trance, and it all feeds into that general hyperpop vibe rather than a genre, I think, nowadays anyway.
This is one that I've kind of collected from lots of articles, and one of them especially was a Dazed article. People have kind of said that now, because hyperpop's in the mainstream, that it's more of like a corporate branding exercise than it is kind of a creative venture for artists. What would you think to that?
So I think that like it always was a kind of, I think a lot of it always has been about the branding. Like I was speaking to Hannah Diamond about this actually, and we were talking about how hyperpop and what it meant. And she said, it's not a sound, it's a demographic. Like when you look at sort of the hyperpop playlist and like all of these artists that are hyperpop, she was like, the sounds are actually kind of different across the board. And it is, she described it as being like a demographic. And I guess that like in that sense, it's when you talk about marketing, I guess it's kind of like aggressively branded marketing towards a certain type of person. I do think that the original sort of PC music stuff, like when you look at the way that they would make like a website for every song, and they'd have these kind of like insane sort of visuals that were really kind of, you know, like finely tuned and sort of photoshopped. And I think that, even the way with sort of Sophie as well, like she did this whole kind of merchandise collection that didn't exist. It was like a virtual merchandise thing, but you couldn't actually buy it. It was just to sort of generate hype. So I think a lot of it has always been about the branding. I mean, when you look at sort of Brat as well now, I think that kind of whole album campaign has really like used a lot of that same kind of thinking with the marketing. So I think that it kind of is about corporate branding a lot, but I don't know. I think there's a lot of potential with it, because what I really liked about the original kind of hyperpop artist was the fact that you got the impression that, you know, they weren't actually kind of pop stars. They were just like random people who had made themselves pop stars, which I thought was really fun. And I feel like there's kind of a utopian potential with that idea that anyone can kind of make themselves a pop star, and that we now have these tools that we can kind of do that with, like, you know, Photoshop, and I guess there's like obviously like production tools which are more accessible, and now that we have the internet as well, that we can just kind of like share things a lot more easily. But at the same time, I do think that is maybe like a little bit of a pipe dream. I mean, one of the big critiques about sort of PC music is that a lot of them are a lot richer than people kind of initially presumed that they are.
Oh, right, okay.
So I don't know if like, I kind of love that idea that, you know, sort of anyone can make themselves into like a sort of shiny, glossy pop star. But I think as well, like, maybe it's not as much of a reality as kind of people think, you know, that kind of original.
It's a facade of like, oh, these people are kind of accessible or kind of DIY,
exactly.
I guess.
100%,
But actually, there's layers.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, especially that's kind of my big critique of it, really, especially when we're talking about sort of corporate branding and stuff like that. You know, like, I guess that there's a worry that people are just sort of using this kind of way of branding to kind of capitalize on the audience and the demographic which is already there, like especially with like sort of like Charlie XCX. Like, I like her, she's cool, but like when you look at sort of what she's kind of representing, like what is that? I'm not really sure. Like, especially with this new album campaign, it does feel a little bit like she's just kind of been like private jet, sort of celebrity, blah blah blah, and then she doesn't really say an awful lot of substance. Like, and there's kind of like this audience which is really supporting her, which is like a predominantly kind of like queer audience who seem quite political, whereas she's quite sort of almost like pointedly apolitical. So I guess that, like, yeah, I understand the critique about it being sort of a corporate branding thing. I can get that. And I think that maybe that kind of is what it's becoming. And maybe that's kind of why it needs to, maybe why we need something different and something new.
Hyperpop's obviously now very much mainstream, or like, let's say hyperpop as like the general term. So do you feel like it feels more of a corporate branding exercise than a creative venture for artists?
I think initially, yes. Like with when, because obviously PC music was doing its own thing for ages. PC music has been going on for much longer than a lot of people realize. And then I think around about 100 gecs showing up was when I think the term hyperpop became like really like, this is it. And, you know, we had the playlist. And I think it's weird because I don't think any of the artists, the initial, like the really
creators.
I don't think that PC music or any of the original, you know, people who started this are doing a corporate branding exercise. I think that as is with many things, people get genuine like excitement out of people. They get a genuine audience who really are actually passionate about what they do. And then a corporate entity will see that and then go, ooh, profit. And then commodify that, make it something neatly packageable, make it something easier to understand, even if that means dwindling the initial meaning of what it is, and then handing it out to people. And considering Spotify's main kind of way of dealing with music is to genre and playlist. It's like, it's kind of only natural that ended up happening. And then weirdly enough, now that happened, there's still artists who are like genuinely inspired by it in like a very organic way. But I do think that because of TikTok and because of this like playlist stuff, there are artists who are like, I'm a hyperpop artist, which isn't bad and isn't wrong. But I do think that type of self-branding is a product of Spotify doing what they've done. And TikTok,
which one could argue
is
is obviously, you know, a corporate company.
Yeah. And
the power to kind of define.
Yeah. And it's like a lot of people, and this also like, this is not like a slant at anyone who is like one of the later people joining this and calling themselves a hyperpop artist, because it's like, I don't blame you for wanting to survive and for having to take that angle, because there's no other option. There's no other option really. There's people getting really a good amount of success from doing that, and I can't knock them for that at all, you know. But it is like, it's like a self-sustaining beast, because as long as it exists, people will need to keep feeding it, and if people keep feeding it, it will continue to exist. Do you know what I mean? So
yes.
It's like it's like, I'm quite I've had people say to me like, oh, you're very anti-industry, and I think it's because I just don't inherently feel that art should be industrialized. I don't think people realize that it is really that literal, that it is the industrialization of music.
I feel like that's where looking at like Brat is so interesting, because I think you could say yes, but then it would be wrong to say that the artists weren't still in control of that in like a lot of situations. Like, I think like the amount of TikToks I've seen on like, I'm a marketing expert. Here's what I think of Brat. And like, it was incredibly done, but I still feel like she seems to be having a lot of fun with it. And like, yeah, it was a lot of marketing. It was a lot of pushing it to us. It was like a lot of these things, but I think you can still have some fun with that and still be on top of that. And I think that was an example of her like being like, okay, you want me to market this like how you think I should, watch me do it, and watch me do it like better than you could have even like imagined it. And I think there's something quite fun about that. I think obviously that doesn't suit everyone. She's been in the industry for ages. She like knows how to do it. Like she is one of the best at it. You can see from like the Lord remix, like whatever people think of it, whether you think it's fundamental and healed you or whether you think it's like silly marketing, like it did well. Like they said it would break the internet, it did. Like people were talking about it. I think people will for a while. If she does do a Sympathy remix with Taylor Swift, I mean, we'll just see what happens again. But I think that's part of like taking control of that and how you can.
Yeah, and I think for us, like, and other emerging artists, we used Hyperpop, especially for that remix we talked about. We used it as like a freeing way to actually change what we did, and then we got like quite a bit of commercial success by accident in a way. Where well, it was our first. We released it on Spotify and got on the Hyperpop playlist, which was a huge win for us because it's all we listen to, and it kind of
German new music playlists.
Yeah, and it kind of we got that win from like just trying to be free and kind of make some music differently. So like the commercial side was not the focus, but it kind of came with it, which we were obviously really happy with afterwards. Yeah. So I wouldn't say, I think for emerging artists, I still feel like it's kind of the freeing element still, because you're not quite aiming for the commercial side.
I think artists are always going to veer towards what they see as beneficial, even in pop music. So even, for example, with the sort of controversy around the new Katy Perry song and the sort of way that she's styled and branded herself, and people saying it's Charlie inspired, and also the new Camila Cabello album, when people are saying this sounds like Charlie, some of the songs. And I think there's always, if you're doing something interesting, you're doing something bold,
people don't want to copy that, you know?
Yeah, and the niche becomes the norm. And I think that's what's happened, and that's fine, and that's going to push people to do more interesting things and push people to get even weirder to separate themselves from that.
But do you think at some point it becomes, so for example, you know, you mentioned like Camila Cabello and you mentioned Katy Perry, Charlie XX, they're like huge names. They're obviously got like quite a big following behind them already. Do you feel like for them it's a corporate branding exercise because they've kind of got such a big team behind them and stuff?
I think it's tough to say. With pop stars, there's always this idea of being genuine and being authentic. And if you stray from a certain vision or a certain view or a certain aesthetic as an artist that people associate you with, then that means you may be like selling out. And that's a concept that like Charlie kind of went very much into in like the Crash era. But I don't think it necessarily means that it is corporate branding. It could be that like Camila Cabello, for example, might just be like interested in Charlie's music and inspired by it. And I think even on that highest level, biting the style is fine. And if you can bring something new and offer something creative to that, then I think that's completely okay.
Well, like you said before, you know, hyperpop for you has been a thing for 10 years, if not more. Like it's been a thing that's been long standing. Do you think that it's now a thing of the past? Like, do you think we're moving on to, I hate to be this person, but like a post hyperpop era where it's becoming other things, it's filtering down to like the next thing? I think so.
And I think that that's what it needs to be honest. I think that needs to happen. I think there's no point sort of hanging on to things and being kind of like really nostalgic about it because it's just not interesting. Like, hyperpop was interesting 10 years ago because like no one had done it before. There was this kind of, I think there were a lot of like different contradictions within the sort of early PC music, Sophie sort of hyperpop, where it was like, you know, tongue-in-cheek, but then it also kind of, they were making music that was seriously good. And it's like, is it high art? Is it low art? Is it kind of advertising? And there were a lot of kind of unanswered questions with it. I guess that like the longer that time progresses, the more people try and answer those questions, in many ways, the less interesting it becomes. And I think that like when you look at Sophie's output, obviously that was cut tragically short, but she sort of seemed to move away quite quickly from that initial sound and then into something different and then into something different again. And I think that really what we need to be doing is just making things which are novel and which are new, and nothing kind of stays like that forever. I think what was super exciting about it at first is this kind of idea that you just didn't really know what it was. It felt kind of a bit slippery almost, like you couldn't quite put your finger on it. Whereas now you get all of these kind of artists on SoundCloud making this, you know, sound of music, which is great. And it's good that kind of people are doing that and people have the tools to kind of put it out there and be part of a scene. But at the same time, I do feel like it's just not that interesting anymore. It's not.
People need to be kind of innovating,
yeah,
pushing
exactly.
boundaries and kind of trailblazing the next thing rather than sitting in, Hyperpop's thing.
Yeah.
But I guess to some, they might have just discovered it, so it might just be their
exactly, yeah,
like
100%.
most recent
totally,
music
and that's
influence.
And that's part of it as well. And I guess it's kind of, it is nice that it's not, I don't know, sometimes I feel like it's almost like music is kind of in a place and time, and then that makes it more disposable. So I guess that like it's nice that people are finding it and still really enjoying it, and it does have that longevity. But like I do think for me personally, it's kind of like I've been listening to this now for a long time, and I want something different.
New.
And I think that maybe that kind of might come from a place where it's coming from artists from different backgrounds. I think that my worry is with the kind of hyperpop stuff that it has always kind of like come from a certain type of person. I feel like a lot of the sort of big sort of hyperpop artists do tend to be kind of like relatively well off, and I kind of just want something a little bit grittier now maybe, and that maybe is going to come from a different place that's kind of not that same sort of world, I guess.
Thank you for coming along with us to discover everything about hyperpop and only that. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to learn more, you can find our social media at ServingKult on all platforms. There will also be extra interview content and behind the scenes, so just make sure to give us a follow. And if you want to hear some of the music our contributors talked about, then please check out the ServingKult radio show. Tune in next month to hear about nightlife, well-being and community. See you soon.